Hello and welcome to the Pod Like a Pro podcast.
This is the podcast dedicated to sharing tips, tricks, and personal experiences that help you to podcast like a professional.
I'm Liz.
And I'm Nat.
And we are from Pod and Pen Productions.
And we're coming to you from Awabakal country in New South Wales, Australia.
Now, so far on this podcast, as you probably, hopefully, if you've been listening for a bit, you know by now, we have these alternate episodes. One episode we talk about tips and tricks amongst ourselves, as in Nat and I, and the other episodes we talk to somebody who is a podcaster. So far, we've talked about the reasons why you should make a podcast.
And in this episode, you'll hear about what you need to know or what you need to work out before you commit to your podcast idea or concept.
So this is like a podcast strategy thing, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you know about the area you want to talk about, and you have a mental list of some of the people that you want to talk to and what you want to talk to them about, but how is it going to sound? That's what we're sort of working out.
How long are your episodes going to be? How many episodes are you planning to record? And how often are you going to publish? All these questions.
There's so many questions, isn't there? And I think as you start thinking about your podcast in more detail, all these questions start popping up. So why do we need to sort all of this out at this stage, do you think?
Do you like to be stressed, Liz? Do you
Ideally not, but somehow I end up being stressed all the time.
Oh well, I think life is stressful. I mean, really, it's really stress later on. It's because having a strategy at this point of the process, it will save you. It'll save you time and it'll save you worry later on, because you're not going to have all this stuff recorded going, oh, I haven't learned how to edit yet. How do I tame all this stuff?
What am I actually trying to do in this podcast? Because sometimes you can, I do see that a lot where people say, okay, well, we'll just press record and we'll see what happens. Or they do this question, and I don't want to be, I don't want to burst anyone's bubble or be putting anyone down, but there is a lot of that. So tell me a bit about yourself. And that sort of thing is not really where we want to be starting by the time we press record. You need a little bit more thought going into it before then.
We want a clear roadmap, because we want to know where we're going and how we're getting there and when we get there as well. So that's why it's important to do it at this stage.
So the first thing really is to articulate your why. So what's the best way about really honing in and getting that why, do you think, Nat?
Getting it into a sentence to say, I'm doing a podcast about this that's going to look at this for this audience. Because once you know what something is, you also know what it isn't. So you're not going to go down those side roads or those country roads. You're going to just be on the freeway. So
for example, if we were using this podcast for an example, our why is we want to be able to help people to sound more professional and really get those skills to create a podcast, empower people to create their own podcasts.
We want to empower people who want to make great podcasts. So that's our sentence. That's our why. So having that clear, and then after that, after you have your why in your sentence, Liz, what do you think the next important thing is?
Well, I'm going to say audience. So we need to know who. So we know why we're talking, but who are we talking to, and that. Then I suppose that helps to identify our why as well, doesn't it, a bit? Yeah,
it sort of speaks to each other. I like to think of the audience as being the thing that you always come back to. If you have sort of like one of those mind maps or whatever and you have a word in the middle, mine is always audience, because every decision that you make is based on your audience.
And it's funny because you think that you're making those decisions based on your audience, but it's so quick and easy to forget who the audience is. And then that's where, you might actually start to lose listeners, because you're suddenly making a podcast that you find really interesting, but not the people that you want listening find really, really interesting.
And actually, I think that's a thing that when I'm making stuff, if I find it really fascinating, I get a bit worried because I think I'm a very strange person, very individual person.
If you start talking too much about trains,
yes,
others may switch off.
They may switch off. Let's not go there. You went there, not me. You went there, not me.
So once you've got your sentence and once you know who you're talking to, what's the next step in the podcast process?
Well, it's making all those decisions in your strategy to, length, how much time does my audience have? What kind of style does my audience like? And those kind of questions I would do. But then I would road test my idea with some trusted people.
So people who you think would the kind of people you would want listening to your podcast, who you can trust their opinion, and you'd say, hey, does this work? Does that work? What about this? Here, I've got a pilot episode. Can you listen and tell me what you think?
Yeah, those people who are interested in those people who are your people, the people that you want to reach, who are your audience, and people who you trust to give you honest feedback. So not just your mum. Maybe your mum's very honest.
Actually, I think my mum would give me really honest feedback too. If I'm honest. She'd go, oh, well, I suppose it's okay. So by working all of this out before you go any further, I feel like that gives that clear direction and purpose, which also helps to feed into the confidence of what you're doing. You know where you're going. You're not so lost. And because we do know that pressing record and having microphones in front of you and being, in a studio like we are now, that can be really daunting.
Yeah, it's a very interesting space to find you in, because it's almost like talking to people is also this unnatural contract as well, because everyone can talk, right? We have conversations all the time. I do this every day. Surely I just have to hit record and it will all work. But it doesn't, and it takes time to learn those skills. It takes time to learn how to listen well, how to follow a conversation, how to come up with your style, how to find your voice. So there's all these things that you are doing once you have hit record, and before you've hit record, there's all these things that you're learning, because you're learning all this stuff all this time. But the good thing about it is you only have to do something new once. So I think that having your strategy behind you, actually knowing what your podcast is before you start anything, just makes everything so much easier because it's clearer. And also another great benefit is when you're actually trying to line up guests, you can actually articulate what it is that you're trying to talk them into, other than, I'm making a podcast about sport.
And I just thought you'd be really good to talk to because you play sport.
Yes.
And I do think, as especially people who get approached all the time to be guests in podcasts, and we do know that some podcasts aren't listened to all that much, so they're going to be selective in who to give that time to. If you go in there with a really clear idea and look quite professional, they're far more likely to say yes to you.
Yeah, because they know what they're getting into. Because your confidence also gives people the sense that they can trust you, that this person actually knows what they're doing. And I mean, we'll get into the art of interviewing a bit later in the podcast, but it is also the confidence that you really do need to be a good interviewer, because even if you're not feeling that confident on the inside, you need to be able to step up and put your best foot forward and lead that interview and actually be quite, not assertive, but I suppose, you show you're the leader, you're the person in control when you're the host of the podcast. Because you need that confidence to be in control. Otherwise, things just slide off the rails. There you go. I went to trains. So that confidence and knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it gives you that confidence in a way that's really quite powerful.
So I hope that's a nice little introduction into the idea of podcast strategy, the knowing your who, knowing your why, and really getting that idea together and road testing that to make sure that it's going to work before you actually put your podcast out there.
And I think the thing that we always say, Liz, is keep it simple.
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple, superstar. Okay, so stay tuned for more podcasting tips, tricks, and personal experiences of people just like you who have been able to create a strategy and then go on to launch their very own podcast.
And if you'd like to learn more about podcasting, you can sign up to our newsletter and read about our Pod Like a Pro podcasting course at podandpen.com.au.
We'll also put a link in the show notes. Until next time, happy listening.